Okay, so take a quick look at your watch or just glance at the time on your screen. We exist in a world that is absolutely governed by those blinking digits, right? Strict schedules, relentless deadlines, the unending march of the second hand. But what if the way you and I experience time isn't actually a hardwired biological reality, but rather a deeply ingrained cultural construction? Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack an incredible narrative from our source text that challenges the very foundation of how human beings experience reality. We're exploring a place that deliberately breaks time in order to help people fix themselves.
So let's dive right into our central premise. What if your experience of time is just a bad habit? Our story follows Sena Okafor. She is a highly rational neuroscientist who specifically studies time perception. And ironically, while she's driving to a conference on neurological time perception, she gets hopelessly lost. Literally navigating by the stars lost. So instead of ending up in some sterile university lecture hall, she stumbles down a gravel path into a secluded, quiet valley and discovers a hidden monastery. But as Sena very quickly finds out, this place operates on completely different temporal rules.
She realizes almost immediately that there is a massive contrast at play here. In our modern world, time is measured by the merciless cesium-133 autumn standard. It's subjective, it's synchronized, and frankly, it doesn't care at all if you're running late for a meeting. But this monastery operates on what they call a generous timeline. It was founded 61 years earlier by a woman named Hildegard Voss. And Hildegard wasn't some mystic, she was a brilliant physicist. She realized that knowing all the fluid, elegant mathematics of space-time didn't actually stop her from feeling the crushing sequential anxiety of everyday life. So she founded this community not to destroy time, but to simply stop taking orders from it.
And get this, the monastery doesn't achieve this through standard meditation alone. They maintain an ecosystem of 14 broken clocks. And they aren't broken by accident. They're maintained in a constant state of specific, almost hilarious wrongness. You've got Contrarius out in the courtyard, which actually runs backward, but at the exact correct speed. There's Tardis in the guest room, stubbornly losing a steady 40 minutes every single day. Valex in the dining hall gains an hour daily, meaning breakfast might just spontaneously happen when the clock says 2:47 p.m. And then there's Alibi up in the library, which keeps absolute perfect time, but for a completely random, shifting time zones somewhere else in the world. These aren't pranks, folks. They're profound philosophical tools.
So you might be wondering, how exactly do you use a broken clock to change your mind? Well, Sena is handed this faded yellow index card detailing a very specific methodology. You sit in front of one of these broken clocks and you just watch it. When your mind naturally rebels and notes that the time is wrong, you ask yourself, wrong by whose measure? You trace that frustration down to its underlying assumption, which is usually our deep-seated belief that atomic sequential time is the only valid reality. And then you simply sit with that assumption until it begins to loosen. You don't force it, you just confront your cultural training and wait. And there's this brilliant phrase the monks use for when this practice actually takes effect. They call it the clenched fist opening. As Sena sits with the tardy clock in her room, she realizes it's not about gaining some new academic theory or reaching a dramatic state of enlightenment. The sensation is literally like a tightly closed fist finally opening. For years, without even realizing it, we've all been clenching our minds around the idea of past, present, and future as this rigid, unbreakable sequence. When you stare at a backward-running clock long enough, that exhausting mental grip just naturally begins to relax.
This somatic loosening unlocks what the monastery calls the first attainment. Instead of viewing time as a one-way street, where the past is permanently sealed off behind you and the future is rushing at you like a freight train, you actually begin to experience a temporal field. The past, present, and future become simultaneously present. Now, this isn't a hallucination. It's a radical shift in perspective, where everything that has happened and will happen feels just as real as the exact moment you're currently in. Now, here's where it gets really profound. It completely unseals our deepest emotions. We see this through a visitor named Frances. She's a widow who came to the valley carrying incredibly heavy grief. By sitting with Contrarius, the backward clock, Frances realizes her intense pain is actually tied to a structural assumption, the assumption that her deceased husband is irreversibly past and gone forever. When that sequential assumption loosens, she feels his presence not as a ghost, but as a simultaneous reality in the temporal field. One of the monks tells her something absolutely incredible. Comfort that isn't also dangerous is just anesthesia. Wow, right? True comfort requires breaking down the temporal walls we build around our pain. We also meet David Leek,
a highly skeptical philosopher who initially arrives just to write a critique of the whole place. David has a 9-year-old son who is neurodivergent and experiences time atypically. For him, an hour can feel like an age, or 3 hours like a minute. Society's default is to pathologize his son's experience, right? To try and normalize it with timers and schedules. But the monastery does something totally revolutionary. It treats temporal difference not as a malfunction, but as pure information. David has this breakthrough realization that his son isn't broken. His son has just been living in the field all along. Which brings us to Brother Matthias, the resident clockmaker. He spends hours meticulously maintaining these broken machines. When Sena asks him why he doesn't just let them run down and succumb to entropy, he insists that their wrongness must be deeply intentional. He drops this absolute gem of a quote. An honest clock makes visible what all clocks are actually doing, measuring themselves. A clock meticulously calibrated to atomic time creates the illusion that it is measuring a fundamental, unchangeable feature of the universe. But Matthias knows better. Matthias explains that a clock doesn't measure actual duration. It just counts its own internal swings and arbitrarily divides infinite duration into manageable little units. Think about it. It imposes human preference onto a universe that literally has no preference. A synchronized clock is basically just a map, and the map is never the territory. Correct clocks participate in a conventional agreement that helps our society run smoothly, sure, but these broken clocks, they participate in a different agreement entirely, one that forces you to question the map and actually experience the territory for yourself. So Sena eventually faces her own lingering grief over her late mother by sitting with Alibi, the library clock. Remember, Alibi tells perfect time for a random city, which on this particular day happens to be Karachi. Sitting there, Sena realizes that at that exact moment, it is 3:22 p.m. in Karachi, and millions of people are living fully real, vibrant lives. She realizes that now isn't just this singular point anchored exclusively to her. It's a plural field happening everywhere at once. And if now is a plural field, well then the past isn't a closed room. Her mother is simply on a different coordinate in that vast field. Venturing out into the courtyard in the middle of the night, Sena has this huge realization. In the quiet darkness, she hears all 14 clocks ticking at once. Because they all run at entirely different rates, they don't form a single synchronized tone. They form a chord, what they call a polyphony of wrong. It is 14 independent voices, 14 totally incompatible truths, all coexisting perfectly in the exact same space without ever asking each other for permission. It's basically the audio representation of a truly simultaneous world. And this beautiful multiplicity, it's captured so perfectly by another visitor, an architect named Kenji Watanabe. He's been visiting the monastery for 3 weeks every autumn. Over 14 years, he's created 196 specific sketches of the clocks. But his sketches actually change over time. Eventually, he draws Alibi not just as a standard clock face, but surrounded by a massive cloud of tiny dots. Each dot represents a simultaneous city, a simultaneous reality crowding around the page. It's an incredible visual record of his own mind letting go of the singular now and embracing the vastness of the temporal field. But, eventually you do have to leave the valley and return to the real world. And that brings us to the second attainment, the ability to be totally free of the sequential construct while remaining functionally within the synchronized world. Sister Marin, who has been a resident for 40 years, perfectly exemplifies this. She actually wears a watch, she knows exactly what time it is, but she is completely unbothered by it. She uses the clock, but she isn't administered by it. You don't have to stay in a hidden valley forever to experience the field. You just have to learn to live in it while waiting for a train or sitting in some tedious staff meeting. Let's track how this actually builds for Sena over time, because her journey definitely doesn't end when she leaves the valley. By day 14, she heads out with that open fist, fundamentally changed. By month 1, she publishes a groundbreaking and honestly highly divisive neuroscience paper on her findings. And by month 14, she actually returns to the valley. But here's the kicker. When she checks her synchronized phone upon leaving the highway, she realizes something vital. The time on her phone is real, absolutely, but it's also just a story. Both things are true. And she has finally learned to live in both temporal realities simultaneously. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about this simple question. Are you checking the time, or is the time checking you? Take a hard look at the devices that govern your day, the alarms that yank you out of sleep, the relentless calendar invites, the blinking digits on your microwave. Consider if your rigid, stressful schedule is actually the fundamental truth of the universe, or if it's just one of many, many ways to read the field. Thank you so much for joining me, and I genuinely hope this helps you open your fist just a little bit today.